I would like to start with the bill for the redevelopment and MIF and JC. Representative Koegel, will you please move your bill and tell us about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that House File 819 be laid over for possible inclusion. And
please proceed, Representative Koegel, and tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. House File 819 focuses our attention on some of the core programs of the Department of Employment and Economic Development that support business development and job creation in communities all across the state of Minnesota. The three programs featured in this bill are the Minnesota Investment Fund, the Job Creation Fund, and the Redevelopment Account. The primary focus of this legislation is to establish base level funding to ensure that the continued success of these programs. We are hoping that the budget target that this committee ultimately receives will allow for maintaining the funding levels that have been in place for the Minnesota Investment Fund and the Job Creation Fund, and will allow us to establish base level funding for the redevelopment account. I have with me representatives from the Economic Development Association of Minnesota and the metropolitan municipalities who have worked on these programs and would like to share with you how important they are to have been helping grow jobs in Minnesota. Our first witness is Charlie Vanderheitti from Minnesota Cities. Then we will hear from LeSueur, Fridley, and Worthington, where we have seen real success with the support from DEED programs. And there are several additional testimonies on the success of these programs in the materials prepared by EDAM and are included in your packets. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we hear from our witnesses, and then I can stand for any questions.
Mr. Addy, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I am Charlie Vanderheitti for Metro Cities, which represents the collective interests of cities across the 7-county metropolitan region at the legislature, executive branch, and the Metropolitan Council. We thank Representative Koegel for introducing this local jobs and tax-based bill. The three funds in House File 819 are Minnesota's response to the global competition that exists for where businesses choose to make investments. While other states invest hundreds of millions of dollars in job attraction efforts, Minnesota's longstanding and relatively modest investments mean good-paying jobs for workers in the Minnesota communities where capital investments are made. The Minnesota Investment Fund and Job Creation Fund are pipeline programs, which means cities in the state are responding at the speed of business. You'll hear from local economic development city practitioners about how cities work with the private sector to grow local economies. While the Job Creation Fund and Minnesota Investment Fund are part of the base budget the legislature passed in 2019, today I will highlight the benefits of the Redevelopment Grant Program, which is not in the base budget. $8 million would fund $1 million to the Metro and $1 million to Greater Minnesota during each of DEED's grant rounds, which take place twice a year. Redevelopment is economic development for many communities. But for creative reuse of brownfield sites, new buildings would not be built, community needs would not be met, and local workers not employed. Redevelopment is the starting line for so many projects, not just in the Metro, but statewide. I point you to the community benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits of brownfield redevelopment handout. When brownfields are redeveloped, neighborhoods become more connected, the health risks associated with air and water pollutants and inactivity decrease, and transportation options become more widely available. And redevelopment means jobs 3 times. The first is during demolition and remediation, the second is during construction, and the third source are the final and ongoing jobs that a new development creates. Metro Cities encourages the committee to include an appropriation for the redevelopment grant program, as well as MIF and JCF. Thank you for your consideration, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next person I have is Dimaggio. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Knorr. My name is Samantha Dimaggio. I'm the Community Development Director in the City of LeSueur. In the 1970s, the city was awarded federal funds from the Housing and Redevelopment Program as part of an urban renewal project. These funds were used to demolish 1 full block of the City of LeSueur in our core downtown. They then partnered with a developer who agreed to build a 93,000 square foot mall in the middle of Le Sueur. I was not in Le Sueur in the 70s, but it appears that what happened was the developer, based on the size building that he wanted to build, he needed to find some more land to accommodate the size plus the parking. So the city agreed to close off our main street. By doing this, we literally divided our community. Fast forward 40 years later, and people's shopping habits have changed. We now have more online retailers, and people, they're just, the way that they're using the retail space is not at the full capacity that it used to be. The mall, when it was full, as I said, was 93,000 square feet. Now it is sitting 70% vacant. This is 65,000 square feet vacant on our main street in the core of our downtown. The city hired a consultant to help us look at options of what we could do with this. They came back with 3 different options ranging from partial demolition to full demolition, but every option that they shared with the city included the reopening of Main Street. We used this information to look for a developer who would be interested in coming into Le Sueur and doing some redevelopment. We did find a developer from the Mankato area, Building Good Downtowns LLC. They saw the potential redevelopment of this site and agreed to move forward with us. This was crucial for us because what the city was doing by asking this redeveloper to come into town, we were also asking them to help us reopen Main Street. And to do that, they had to demolish 18,000 square feet from a building that they were in the process of acquiring. That's huge to ask them from the instant they get a building to take off 18,000 square feet of it. We were able to offer this developer a TIF, a redevelopment TIF, but this only generated $450,000. What happens is because we were doing a redevelopment, we weren't really building on, we were actually taking off square footage. Luckily, there is a second story to the mall. The developer is going to turn that into apartments. So therefore, we qualified for a redevelopment TIF. As I said, with the $450,000 generated, though, the developer asked for 100% of this TIF. They needed it to move tenants, to do a new build out, to bring them all up to today's standards. This was a 40-plus-year-old building. Their costs are looking at over $4 million. So this left the city with a gap of our own because we needed funds to finance the demolition of that 18,000 square feet. We had to move utilities and we had to construct a new Main Street. We have about a $2 million gap. The city applied for deeds redevelopment funding. Unfortunately, we were not able to get it the first year we applied because they did not have enough funds. We reapplied a second year and thankfully we were awarded $857,000. This is huge for our city because we will still have to bond for about $1.2 million, but our city only has a population of 4,000 people. We are a very small community, and this is huge for us. You know, one thing that we were worried about is if we didn't get this funding and the developer walked away, what would happen to our city? When people saw this vacancy in our core downtown, they assumed our city was dying, and they were basically right. We were dying. Our population has been stagnant for years. Our school district has declining enrollment. We have some issues, but I've had people say the first thing I notice when I get into your town is it looks like your town is dying. You have this huge vacant building right in the middle of town. So this was just crucial for us to get these funds from DEED. Because of these funds, we are now able to retain 22 jobs. These jobs and these businesses are crucial for the city of Le Sueur. I'm talking about a dentist's office, an orthodontics office. There's an optometrist's office, a pharmacy, a hardware store. These are for small town America, these are important businesses. And we now have potential to add new businesses in the redevelopment area. Plus the developer is going to put those 17 apartments on the second story, which is going to add housing. We are also having housing challenges, much like many other cities. This has been a very complicated project, but I have to tell you how much the city of Le Sueur truly appreciates the state of Minnesota's investment in the redevelopment grant program. I appreciate DEED and their staff, and this has been a huge success for our city. I tell everyone this is a game changer for Le Sueur, and it truly is. And I would love for you to come to Le Sueur anytime you want. I'd love to give you a tour. I think you'll talk to our residents and see that this has really reinvigorated our community. Lastly, I not only work for the city of Le Sueur, but I also proudly serve as the vice president of the Economic Development Association of Minnesota, as EDM. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with EDM, but we are a statewide economic development organization. The Minnesota Investment Fund, the Job Creation Fund, and the Redevelopment Fund are programs that are vital to our communities. And the members that we have, they are in every corner of the state of Minnesota. So these programs are vital for our members, for our communities we serve. And we just truly appreciate you listening to this bill, and we fully support funding of House File 819. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next person is Mr. Hickman.
Thank you, Chair Knorr, members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. My name is Scott Hickok. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Fridley. And today I'll talk to you about two projects that we had in Fridley. Both of them very, very successful, and both of them had to do with funding through deed. Part of this was through the redevelopment grant funds. The other part was through MIF. And I'll spend a little bit of time today very briefly to tell you about each one of these. Next slide, please. With the use of deed redevelopment grant funds, we were able to inspire a development on 122 acres. This 122 acres was a development that used to be the home of Northern Pump, later FMC, and BAE, British Aerospace Electronics, was the final user of that site.
Mr. Hickok, I didn't want to interrupt you, but the slides are not moving, so they're just static in the first page. So if you wanted, you need to put it in a presentation mode and then go to the next. Yep, that's good.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate your pointing that out. Through the use of funds, we were able to, if I could back up to the last slide, please. Through the use of these funds, we were able to not only inspire development on this site. This is a 122 acre site that developers for many, many years went by the site. BAE was still in there, though they were only using a small portion of the 2 million square feet. To put it in perspective, 2 million square feet is what the IDS tower is. This was an industrial site that was spread across the land. Very little of that square foot dimension was actually being put to use. And a major portion of that building really needed redevelopment. Developers would tell us that this site was too expensive, even if they got the land for free. They could not afford the demolition of the buildings and some of the infrastructure improvements that they would need to make this site work. Through the use of redevelopment grant funds, we were able to help a developer inspire that developer to redevelop the site. They used deed funds in the amount of $500,000 for the demolition of pavement on the site, for water and sanitary sewer connections, for new water main installation, and for a relocation of an existing sanitary sewer on site. Very important pieces to the development. What did that bring then? Next slide, please, Charlie. The Northern Stacks development, as it then built out, replaced the 2 million square feet of outdated, inefficient building with 1.6 million square feet of new and improved office, showroom, and industrial space. There were less than 400 jobs left on the BAE site when the developer took over this site and was inspired by these funds. Now there are over 2,000 jobs on that site, 1,600 jobs improvement. The site was valued at $13 million back when it was undeveloped or developed with this very underdeveloped state, a very large building without a lot of future potential. The site is now $113 million, an increase of $100 million in value, which is incredible. And that's to the tax base ultimately. And eventually heavy contamination was able to be cleaned up on this site because of these dollars that really inspired the growth. Charlie, next slide. To be able to see this graphically, you can see on the left side of your screen that very large industrial complex that at one time really served a wonderful purpose in providing munitions and military armaments. But as it aged and as the use became less and less and it became just more research and engineering in the building, manufacturing had left, it was a cavernous space that needed a new life. On the right side of your screen, you will see the 1.6 million square feet of new industrial. What's beautiful about this is that it's a really diverse industrial population in there. And by being that diverse industrial population, it really helps to weather economic storms. And it really provides us an opportunity to have a great mix of industry, new jobs, new excitement for the area. Next slide, Charlie. You'll see a before and after here. You can see on the left side of your screen what it looked like when developers said, we couldn't afford it if you gave it to us for free. We can't afford to tear it down, much less put any improvements on the land. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a glimpse of the end product that Hyde Development brought to this site, Paul Hyde and others. Really a beautiful end representation of what can happen with the inspiration of these funds and bringing about new and exciting architecture to the land. I always like to say that development begets development. And sometimes it just takes that inspiration to get the first spoon of earth dug out and much great things to follow. I'll move on to MIF. Once this was developed, once we had 1.6 million square feet of new industrial space, there was another inspiration that happened through the Minnesota Investment Fund. And there was a group called Certified Power Incorporated, and they were looking at taking a space in this site. What they were looking at doing is they had 3 locations. They had one in Illinois and they had 2 in Minnesota. It was becoming very inefficient for them to work in that manner. They really needed to combine their site. They needed to come to one location, and it was either going to be Minnesota or Illinois. Through the Minnesota Investment Fund, they chose Fridley in a large part because they were inspired by the funds that they could gain by making their capital investments here and by bringing new jobs to this region. Next slide. We're very, very pleased that they came to Fridley. We're very, very pleased that they have added to not only to our tax base here, but they have brought jobs and excitement to our community. And next slide, Charlie. What they brought is the addition over the next 2 years, hopefully 36 new full-time equivalent jobs within 4 years. Within the first 2 years, 10 of those jobs. Within 4 years, 36 jobs. Also, they have brought $2.25 million in capital investment. Add that on top of the $113 million of value that Hyde Development brought by bringing the shells of the buildings. You have places like Certified Power Inc. then that brought an additional $2.25 million to our tax base and to provide jobs. Again, 36 jobs within the next 4 years, we're very excited about. And my last slide, Charlie. We are thrilled in Fridley to have Certified Power Inc. And we want to thank the state of Minnesota indeed for the inspiration that first brought the life back to 122 acres through the redevelopment dollars. And then second, through the Minnesota Investment Fund, we were able to attract a business like Certified Power Inc., who plans to spend a lot of years here in the future. And we're just very, very happy to have them. With that, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next person last testifies Mr. Briesen. Please welcome and introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Norm. My name is Jason Briesen. I'm the Assistant City Administrator and Director of Economic Development for the City of Worthington, Minnesota. I just want to say thank you to Representative Knorr and the Workforce and Business Development Committee for hearing this bill today. Thanks to Representative Koegel for her introduction and authorship of the bill. Thanks to Representative Hamilton for always looking out for our interests in St. Paul there. And I also want to just say thanks to Bob Isaacson and his team at DEED for their assistance with this project, especially Lisa Hughes, Jason Burek, and Tom Washa were really the folks that helped us out. So I'll admit I'm from St. Paul. So if you're like me and didn't know where Worthington was, we're located in the bottom left-hand corner of Minnesota is the best way to describe it. It makes our job a little bit challenging because we compete with South Dakota and Iowa for jobs, and sometimes they're willing to give away the farm. So DEED hopefully helps us level the playing field in some instances. As you may know, most rural communities in the state of Minnesota are in population decline. They're aging, they're relatively homogeneous. and they're seeing disinvestment. I think there was a little bit of talk about that today. On the flip side, Worthington is actually booming. We've shown double-digit census growth over the past 2 census periods. We're getting younger. We're the 3rd most diverse city in the state per capita. And we also have the 2nd largest share of residents who don't speak English at home, although 42% of them speak good English. So we are a very unusual rural community. And you know, we also have seen a lot of investment. We had 72 million in construction for 2020, which doesn't include some major capital investments. And that was more than double than we had ever done before. So we're pretty proud of that number. And so I guess the question is, what is driving these trends? And the answer to that would be mostly the Swift Port Company, who we partnered with, Indeed. So they had employed 2,200 people. Well, now with this project, it's 2,300. I still have to get used to saying that number now because it's been 22 for so long. They process 20,000 hogs per day. They're part of JBS, who is the largest animal protein processor in the world, and they are the world's 2nd largest pork producer. So fun little fact, if you buy pork at Costco, anyone on the Zoom call today, it came from Worthington. And if you buy pork from Costco anywhere in the world, it came from JBS. So that's kind of an interesting little fact. So they're a huge part of the economic ecosystem for Southwest Minnesota, the trucking companies, the farms, the grocery stores that all the people they employ buy, all the different stores. So they're a huge part of our ecosystem. And they've been trying to get this expansion project done for about 10 years, long before I ever got here. And it took a little bit of salesmanship on the behalf of our local folks here at the plant. Indeed's help. So they have 300 facilities worldwide, and we were really in the running with their facility in Illinois, not different from the last testimony we just heard. So Deed stepped up to the table and offered $450,000 in Minnesota investment funds and $550,000 in job creation funds. And if you're not exactly familiar with how these work, what happens is MIF grants dollars to the city, and then the city loans those out to the employer. And the job creation fund is a performance-based assistance where, as they continue to meet the job and the wage goals, Deed will pay the employer back. So with our labor quality and Deed sweetening the pot, we were able to get the deal done. We leveraged $29 million of private investment with $1 million in public investment. Those of you who have been doing economic development for a while know that's a pretty good return on investment. It's a $30 million project, 175,000 square foot facility, approximately 70 new full-time jobs ranging from 17 an hour to 21 an hour plus benefits. If you want me to kind of show you the scale and scope of this, they're capable of holding 25 million pounds of frozen product and 2.5 million pounds of fresh product. I can't even really wrap my brain around that scale, but that just gives you a sense of how they operate. So I guess what the takeaway point is, this has been a huge success story for Worthington. I hope that these tools continue to be available for other communities so they can grow and thrive like Worthington. And I think you all are holding the purse strings. So I hope you hear that coming from my testimony today. And I'd just like to say thank you to Deed, and thank you for the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Members, any discussion? I know Lead Hamilton will be happy to know that his district was mentioned in the conversation as how these programs work. Any questions? I don't see any questions. Lead Hamilton, did you want to make a statement?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for just pointing that out. We're very proud down there of the city of Worthington, and nice job on your testimony as well. Thank you.
Thank you. As the process, we move on with bills. I think something that we have mentioned from the beginning, we look into the equity and how we spend some of the resources. With closing remarks, Representative Koegel, as you renew your motion, can you tell us a little bit about how we will be able to put some equity into this program? I know we do have a small portion of it in the bill. I'm also looking for the long term, not just the brief assessment that we're doing in the bill today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so some of the equity language I worked on with Deed, and really this is just about outreach and technical assistance. I think, a lot of folks don't know that these programs are available. And then the application process tends to be kind of cumbersome. And so we wanted to make sure that we were making community aware of these programs, that this funding is available for them. And then if they needed any help applying, that DEED was there to offer them assistance. And so we applied that equity language to both the MIF and the Job Creation Fund. And I also just wanted to mention that my dad and my aunt both worked at BAE Systems. And so I actually was able to get security clearance for a day and did the Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. And that site is huge. People had bikes and golf carts to get around in. And so it's really neat to see how that facility has changed. And so, and I also think that Mr. Briesen highlighted some of the need for the equity language as well, because we want to make sure that folks from all different parts, from all different parts of the state and all different walks of life are able to access this and really start to, build generational wealth. And so that's really kind of where some of that equity language came in.
Thank you, Representative Koegel. Renews her motion, House File 819 be laid over for possible inclusion.